All right, so we're back and we have Anca Dragan with us today.
Hi, everybody. Good to be here. Thanks for watching the talk.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you here. So how the Q&A session will work is you all can paste your questions either into the Q&A in the Zoom or also in the Rocket chat. And yeah, let's get started. It seems like we have a question in the Rocket chat already. So, all right, here it goes. Can we model the dynamics of the agents and environment with similar algorithmic approaches? Just like human internal dynamics, we don't know the dynamics model of the stochastic environments.
Yeah, that question is really where this approach to essentially algorithmic human-robot interaction kind of started, the notion, or at least the type of approach that I've been talking about in the talk. It was really the realization that we can handle interaction with sort of the physical world, the environment already autonomously. Could we somehow port that over to the way we handle interaction with people? And that much like the way we think about interaction with the environment as we need to make predictions about how the environment will behave, right? How the environment will respond and what will happen over time. And I see the question Vidya is asking specifically about stochastic environments, right? Which are notoriously difficult to anticipate. That we maybe can think of people that way as well. And that's kind of where things got started, right? Let's talk about the dynamics of human state, physical and internal, and how the robot's actions are influencing all of that. Now we have to be careful though, because the two are not one and the same. So the umbrella approach, the umbrella formulation might start in the same way, but then the reason people are kind of different from the environment is driven by physics, right? People are driven by essentially the way they change is based on their decisions, based on the inferences that they have. So you kind of have to take that perspective and wonder, why aren't they arbitrary? Why aren't they acting in an arbitrary way? What's driving these decisions that I'm making? What can I have to say? And that's kind of leading to these more game theoretical approaches that I've been talking about, where you think of them as, oh, but they have an intent. I can represent that as an objective. They're interested in optimizing for that intent, but wait, they're aware of the robot and so on. So the fact that they're agents in the environment, as opposed to just driven by the laws of physics, makes people particularly interesting aspects of the environment. And it often turns the problem from a single agent problem, the agent with its environment, to a multi-agent problem of the agent acting in the presence of another agent with unknown objectives, so under a partial information.
Yeah, thank you for that really good answer. Along that note, so for the information gathering strategies that you mentioned in your talk, especially when we're considering situations where we have multiple agents at play, do you ever experience issues or failure modes where the robot sort of gains misleading or ambiguous information that hinders it from achieving its original goal?
So the reason we started doing information gathering in the first place was because just observing people without intervening was leaving things too ambiguous. And so we said, oh, we have to do information gathering. We have to actually leverage the robot's actions to gain more information, to disambiguate what's going on. Now, that fails in kind of two ways. One way it actually fails is that no matter what you do, things are still ambiguous. So you have to kind of deal with that. But the other maybe more interesting way in which it fails is when you go and gather information, even though you don't need to. So the challenge with the approach we've taken so far is that it doesn't really reason about something called the value of information, right? So I should only gather information if it's really gonna alter my decision in some meaningful way, if it's really gonna impact the bottom line, if it's gonna impact the reward that I end up getting. But that's kind of a POMDP framework, and it's hard to solve these in continuous state and action spaces, particularly continuous action spaces. And so we kind of settled for this kind of proxy to that, where we said, oh, we're just going to incentivize information gathering as part of the objective. But unfortunately, what that does is the robot always has this incentive, regardless of whether it's actually useful or not. And there's tricks you can play, like you can say, I'm going to incentivize more information gathering if the belief has higher entropy, right? So there's more opportunity. So I actually need to learn something. There is something to be learned, but that doesn't mean that it's going to influence your decisions. And so we've been looking recently at ways to think about how we might be able to approximate this influence on the decision making, this influence on the reward, without actually going through the full POMDP solver.
Yeah, thank you for the really thoughtful answer. One thing I was curious about, so I think during your talk, you mentioned that there are all these emerging areas at the intersection of these disciplines, such as like human cognition and robotics and game theoretic approaches as well. In your opinion, are there any particularly specific emerging areas that you're excited about?
Yeah, I mean, these days, what I'm very selfishly interested in is something like cog-sci meets behavioral economics meets machine learning for the purpose of modeling the biases, the suboptimality that people have. So where we're starting to get into trouble with the approaches that I was mentioning in the talk is that they're largely driven by these assumptions that people have some intent, but then the way that they act is approximately optimal with respect to that intent. In some places, we even use perfectly optimal, which is very much wrong. In some other places, we said noisily optimal, right? So some, very typical model we would use is kind of a Boltzmann, like Gibbs-like distribution. We say the probability of an action is proportional to the exponent to e to the kind of q value of that action, right? So the more rational an action is, the closer to optimal an action is, the more probable it is. But that doesn't mean that people take the optimal action. But now where that starts, that's sort of papering over suboptimality with kind of just noise, right? It's sort of saying, well, people are acting differently, but I'm going to call that noise. And I'm going to say, well, there's this stochastic process then drawing from this distribution. It's a little bit better than like taking a Gaussian, and taking the optimal action, stuffing noise around it by a Gaussian. It's a little bit better than that. It's multimodal and so on, but still, it's really just kind of plastering over the actual problem, which is that people have systematic biases, right? They're not just saying, oh, I'm going to do something suboptimal. It's basically, there's all sorts of things, myopia, not thinking forward ahead is one example I had towards the end of the talk, but there's this thing called prospect theory about sort of we're risk averse, where there's just the confirmation bias. There's all sorts of things that people have found, and it's kind of like this list that's been building over decades of these findings of, look, we're biased in this way, look, we're biased in this way, look, there's this thing that we're doing, look, there's that thing that we're doing. So far, there's been relatively little sort of formalism behind it. There's a few theories, but we don't have this kind of comprehensive understanding of, well, what are these things that are at play? And that's really difficult from a robotics and AI more broadly perspective, right? Because you can't sort of sit down and encode every single bias and account for it. You need sort of some general purpose models that will learn from the individual and adapt, and that's it. And so thinking about how you can develop that, right? Thinking about how you can put everything under a cohesive umbrella that's kind of nicely parameterized by, not too many parameters, so you have a chance at adapting to an individual within just a few samples, but not so, strict that it's rational or approximately rational, something more flexible. I think that's really exciting, and it's very much an interdisciplinary type of question. And I can talk more about that, but I also want to give you.
I see. So I think this was accidentally pasted in a private chat, but we have a question where, how do you think intelligence and the way we think about intelligence in human-robot interaction will change in the future? And I think this is particularly relevant given how you mentioned that we're not doing a great job modeling the suboptimality of humans. I think there's a lot of discourse on how we can always be optimal or rational.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a really good point that, and I'm not sure this is fully answering that question. I mean, maybe there's multiple answers I could give, but definitely one of them is being more mindful of realistic human behavior. And one of the things I've been excited about is to really cast human suboptimality less about being a problem with the human and more like being a problem with the robot not understanding something. So I like to say that people aren't really, they're irrational from a kind of a ground. If you know the ground truth, then they're not taking the right actions, but they might actually be much closer to optimal under their own belief about the world, the state of the world, how the world works, and so on. And so we've been kind of pursuing a bit of this kind of mini research agenda in the lab lately that's been looking at, well, if people are taking actions that seem really noisy or really weird, maybe the explanation is that they're observing the world in a different way than the robot is. And so their state estimator maybe that has some flaws or something like that. And so that's leading them to not know exactly what the state of the world is. And so they're taking a pretty reasonable action, but under the wrong assumption about the state of the world. Or similarly to that, maybe they don't understand exactly how maybe they don't understand the dynamics of the system, right? The transition function in an MDP. Like maybe they're acting in this world, but they're taking actions based on kind of an example is we have this notion of an intuitive physics in our head, right? That we have a simulator of physics, but it's not, at least we can't predict exactly what will happen with a dynamical system. We have some intuitions, but they're not perfect. And this appears very much when you put people in control of robots, especially complicated robots. If you have people pilot drones, or if you have people operate 7 degree of freedom arms, right? That's really difficult for people. And it's difficult for many reasons, but we found maybe one of the reasons is that they're not familiar with the dynamics of that system. And so they're taking actions that are very suboptimal under the physical system, but perhaps they're actually close to optimal under their very simplified version of how the system works. And so if you account for that, then you can figure out what they're trying to do and then send the physical system where they're actually trying to do. So this was a paper in NeurIPS a couple of years ago. It was called, it had a cute title, like, "Where do you think you're going? Human beliefs, adjusting for internal dynamics," something like that. So this notion that like does give people a bit more credit. Yes, underground truth, if they knew everything that the robot knows, they're suboptimal, but maybe their actions make sense. And I see that I have to shut up now because we're done. But thank you very much, Christy, for organizing this and for the wonderful questions. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much for all your answers. So that concludes the Q&A session. I think we had one remaining question. Maybe we can port that over to the Rocket Chat. But for now, WiML's president, Sarah Osentowski, will present the WiML closing remarks. So yeah, thank you, Anca, so much for joining us today.
Hi, Sarah. Hi, everybody. Bye. Take care.
Bye.